Hey guys, Jerry the Poor Historian here, and I am proud to share with you today a new addition to my Poor Historian sword collection. This is kind of a unique one. I've wanted to get my hands on it for a while, but let me do a little bit of a lead up here. So today there are 3 nations in the world that really pump out Poor Historian swords. They're not very high quality, but they've got a lot of them. We've covered most of them in the past, but this third one we haven't touched on yet. First one, Pakistan. You always see those made in Pakistan stamps on the blades. 2, you have India, and you see my India sword collection, or at least part of it behind me. But the third one, really unexpected, Spain. Spain, and specifically the town of Toledo, has a lot of tourism swords in there. And there's 2 particular styles of Spanish Poor Historian swords that were actually based on historical swords. So we have Tizona and Colada, and those are both swords supposedly used by the Spanish champion and hero El Cid. So I'm not going to get into the history of El Cid. That might be something that was fun to get in a later video. But those 2 swords, Tizona and Colada, are the swords that they reproduce for the tourism industry. Now they do have the supposedly original swords, Tizona and Colada, but the tourism swords, they get kind of a little off, a little different. But the one that I added to my collection today is Tizona. So this is actually a very fun sword. The original Tizona is supposedly, it's about 10 inches longer than this one. But it has some very unique characteristics. First, you can see that it has the, I don't want to get into the history of it. I want to get into the quality of the sword. That's what the Poor Historian reviews are about. So you can find these types of swords all over the internet. They're very low quality, low cost. Don't use them for fighting or sparring or anything. This one did come dull, so I'm okay with that. But I got this one for $25 on eBay. Now, just like the India swords that we have hanging on the wall back there, you cannot get them new. Or you can get them new, but they're difficult. They're not very common to find new. You might find an occasional Amazon or an low-quality knife retailer online. But you do see quite a lot of them used as well coming in. So, some unique things about this. The first thing, just like the India swords, there are quite a lot of varieties of this sword. They have different types of blade lengths, different types of blades, different types of inscriptions on the blade here. And then also the pommel is often some unusual styles. So we'll start there. We'll start at the pommel. So take a look at this pommel here. I'm going to put the picture of the original Colada pommel on there. It's kind of a really unique pommel. It's got the hollow blades in it. So apparently the story behind Tizona is that El Cid had it in the early part of the millennia, of the 1000 millennia, and used it in the Reconquista against the Moors coming up through Spain. So apparently throughout the years, the blade itself has been, or the sword as a whole has been lost, but for whatever reason in the 16th century, the blade itself was found and a new hilt was added. So in the original sword, supposedly, the blade is from the probably 1000 or 1000s or 1100s, and the grip is from the 16th century. So you have a 16th century style grip on here. The pommel, now keep in mind this is also supposed to be a hilt that was rebuilt from mythology. So you don't see this type of pommel very frequently used on standard swords. Let's move up a little bit. We've got the grip here. It's kind of wrapped in kind of a natural paracord material. I'm not going to claim to be familiar with what it actually is. But then it's the pommel is, and the cross guards and the quillions are cast metal. I don't really want to claim to be able to identify what metal it is. It's definitely got a brass looking coloration to it. But it's definitely probably not high quality, probably cast iron or something similar to that. So, nonetheless, the cross guards are actually fascinating as well. You've got really unique looking style there. So looking into the history of it, some claim that this is actually a Spanish-Moorish combination style of crossguard. You see types of swords in the early medieval era and through probably the 1400s of a similar style crossguard where the crossguards are actually very close to the blade itself. Now what's unique is that this style of crossguard you actually see in the early 1600s in a Dutch soldier's print collection. And the soldiers that are wielding the swords like this are actually shield persons, people who would have the shield in one hand and the sword in the other. And you see that throughout other nations as well throughout the centuries. And usually they're carried with a shield. Now what you can tell about that is that the crossguards are actually, they're not sticking out flat like standard medieval crossguards or 16th century crossguards from that time of the Renaissance. They're curved forward, they don't stick out very far. And the idea is that the crossguards, since they don't stick out so much, you can get around the shield much easier. You see a similar concept in Viking era swords when they would have their shield, and the thin crossguards on the Viking swords as well to allow them to get around the shield. Very fascinating, very cool that you can see that there are actual original depictions of a very similar style of sword like this. Back to the sword quality itself, before we take apart the scabbard and the hilt here, not the scabbard, I'm sorry, the hilt. I do want to look at the blade. It does have this really unique inscription on here, and I think that they really added that more so for the tourism industry. I'm not sure. Actually, I have to do a little bit more research on that, but I'll post pictures in the editing era. It's on both sides. It does say Spain down here, and it says, where did it say? It says Toledo right up there. And it has some fairly cool looking inscriptions on there as well. I'm not sure how common this type of coloration was on the original swords, but it's actually raised or engraved. So it's not a flat with a painted on picture. I mean, it might be painted on, but there's also a raised bit of the metal as well stamped on. So, talking about the blade, there is no fuller. This is not a very good blade. However, I might make the argument that it is carbon as opposed to stainless steel. Stainless steel usually has that mirrored finish, that mirrored polished look, and this actually has a more subtle look to it. I'm not going to claim that it's high quality. I'm just saying I don't think that it's stainless steel. Meaning, this has a much more period look, not quality, of the sword to the originals. It's also very short. I'll post the actual length in the editing on the side here. But I do want to also take apart the hilt here. So just like the standard poor historian swords, the pommel unscrews. But this one actually is much more solid, I feel, in the screwing on and screwing off, because it's not just a little nut that's held on. You can see it's actually going into the pommel quite a ways. The other thing is that, unlike the India swords, where the grip here just kind of slides on and off, you actually need to untwist the grip as well, which is neat. And the reason being, you can see there's a little nut. You'll be able to see it when I take the handle off itself. Not a little nut, it's a washer that bites into the threading on the hilt itself, kind of making the pommel solid, or not the pommel, the grip solid in addition to the pommel. There, you can kind of see the metal washer in there. And then crossguard easily comes off. So you can see, if you look here, it's technically not a rat tail, which is just a little bit welded on, but it's technically not one solid piece either. You can see that the threading part, see if I can use my finger there, the threading part is actually a separate piece, which is about yay long. It's flattened at the tip and then kind of cheaply either welded or forged together there. It's not very solid. This sword will break if you try to hit it against things. However, because it's not a rat tail and because of the solidity of the grip actually screwing on in addition to the pommel, I would say you can actually spin this fairly safely without any sort of snapping. Just don't hit it on anything. One last thing while I put this back together is that, well, I do want to say, and I want to clarify this for anyone who might be confused, this sword, nor any of the poor historian swords, should ever be claimed to be a true Hema, historical European martial arts, the proper use of swords and their techniques, no poor historian sword should ever claim to be a Hema sword. They are not. They're not that quality. You need to have stability and rigidity for that. Nonetheless, I know that some people, if they want to practice the techniques, which is a very important part of Hema, some of these poor historian swords, usually the ones that are not rat tail, meaning they have a little bit of a weld kind of connecting it to a little slot like that, those are not for use. But this one is solid enough where you could at least use it for some flow drills or techniques. So I did want to show you, you can kind of see it. The blade is not in line with the grip. It kind of drops down a little bit, which is not very good. So I'm not going to claim that every one of these swords looks like that or has that issue with it, because like I said in the beginning, there's so many varieties. And also I got this one used, so I don't know if that's a legitimate thing to point out. But there is a little bit of uniqueness to the blade. For example, it does have, given the unnecessary ricasso here that's unsharpened, and then also has a very, very slight tapering to it, and then it comes to a point. But again, it is not sharp, meaning the people did not try to sell this as your cliche, yeah, I like swords, tourism nonsense with skulls and dragons and nonsense on there too. Overall, I think I'm actually very pleased. This is the first Spanish tourism sword that I've added to my collection. I've wanted them for quite some time. So I'm fairly pleased with it. I don't like how the metal here is cast iron. I wish it were described, or cast something. I wish it were actually forged, but poor historian swords, you can't really do that. And I'm going to have to look into the decorations on there too. I don't like how there's no fuller. The original did have a fuller, but I don't think this ever claimed to be. This claimed to just be representative of the original. So I'm going to go ahead and put the reviews up and put the grades on there, and we'll see what this baby gets. Other than that, catch you guys next time.